We are lying here, perhaps staring at the ceiling, waiting for the heavy hand of unconsciousness to finally settle over us. The world outside has been carefully minimized, the sounds muffled, the light extinguished. Yet the mind remains stubbornly illuminated. It's during these isolated interstitial hours that the brain, freed from the strictures of daytime tasks, begins its late-night inquiry into the fundamental architecture of reality. The questions that seem ludicrously grand at noon, what does it mean to know? What is the limit of thought itself? Suddenly feel urgent, immediate, and painfully unanswerable. This quiet, unnerving environment is the perfect stage for the most disruptive reflections offered by 20th century thought. This is the domain of Ludwig Wittgenstein, the philosopher whose genius lay not in providing solutions, but in demonstrating with chilling clarity the exact contours of our linguistic and cognitive limitations. He is not the philosopher of comfort or resolution. He is the philosopher of necessary silence. The philosophical discomfort inherent in Wittgenstein's analysis, the very quality that makes his work both magnetic and deeply frustrating, is perfectly captured by his major titles and the concepts they contain. They confront brutally and elegantly the limits of thought and language, making them excellent content for deep, unsettling reflection while awaiting sleep. He strips away the illusion that we can simply think our way out of the fundamental paradoxes of existence. Instead, he demonstrates that the paradoxes are often nothing more than language gone on holiday, a cognitive engine spinning its wheels on the frictionless ice of grammar. Consider his early masterpiece, the Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus. This is not a relaxing read. It is a work of immense rigor, an attempt to define the precise boundary between what can be meaningfully said, the logical propositions that mirror facts in the world, and what must, by necessity, be passed over in silence. The Tractatus offers us a crystalline picture of language, a structure designed to prevent us from falling into metaphysical nonsense. But the real, mind-bending friction comes with the book's conclusion. After spending 70 pages meticulously defining the rules of logical sense, Wittgenstein tells us that the very propositions he used to define those rules are, strictly speaking, nonsensical. He insists that his work functions as a temporary scaffold, a tool used to climb to a new intellectual vantage point. Once the climber has used the structure to see the world clearly, they must recognize the scaffold as inherently flawed, as a necessary falsehood, and they must throw the ladder away. Imagine lying here, your mind trying to digest that paradox. The very intellectual tool you use to achieve clarity must be discarded because the clarity reveals the tool itself was a fabrication. That is not a sedative thought. That is the kind of intellectual vertigo that keeps us awake, staring into the dark. It is the realization that the deepest truths are found not in articulation, but in silence, in the realm of the mystical, which lies beyond the edge of language. What keeps us awake is the gnawing frustration that our most profound questions necessarily require silence, yet our nature demands articulation. We are trapped, trying to speak the unspeakable. Decades later, Wittgenstein performed one of the most remarkable intellectual shifts in philosophical history, captured in his posthumously published philosophical investigations. If the Tractatus sought purity and crystalline logic, the Investigations embraces the mud and the messiness of how we actually use words. He moves away from the idea that language is a mirror of objective reality and introduces the defining concept of language games. This later shift is, in its own way, perhaps even more profoundly unsettling to the isolated late-night mind. Where the early work implied a hidden, absolute truth accessible only through logic and then silence, the later work suggests that truth and meaning are entirely contextual, born out of communal practice. Meaning is not inherent in the word, it is inherent in the language game we are playing when we use the word. We try to define simple concepts. What is knowledge? What is pain? And suddenly Wittgenstein shows us that we are engaged in an unending, circular dance. The definitions only make sense within the context of the activity. If we change the game, the meaning shifts. If we cease playing the game, the meaning vanishes. This realization hits hardest when we are isolated, waiting for sleep. During the day, we are confident in the shared reality established by our language games. The doctor knows pain, the banker knows money, the lover knows affection. But when the light is off and the pressure of public affirmation is gone, we are left alone with the fundamental contingency of our own thought. If my understanding of the world, my identity, my deepest feelings, is dependent not on internal substance but on a perpetually shifting public language game, what happens when the players go home? This vulnerability, this acknowledgement that our inner life is inseparable from our outer shared lexicon, is the source of the profound discomfort. Wittgenstein confirms that the feeling of inadequacy when trying to articulate the nature of consciousness or the feeling of time is not a personal failing but a linguistic one. We are using tools designed for everyday tasks, to pass the salt, to describe a tree, to try and move mountains. He forces us to see that philosophical problems are often symptoms of linguistic bewitchment, the mental fly that needs to be shown the way out of the fly bottle. And the way out is not a grand, encompassing theory, but simply the act of stopping the machine, recognizing that the engine was running idle, generating unnecessary friction and noise. Perhaps, then, the greatest lesson, the true path to sleep, is to embrace the silence he ultimately championed, to recognize that when the mind spins endlessly on questions of ultimate meaning, it is often just language having a noisy holiday. The answers, if they exist at all, are beyond the boundary he so fiercely delineated, and acknowledging that boundary, surrendering to the limits of what can be said, is the only intellectual prerequisite necessary before we finally let go. Stop playing the game and surrender to the night. The silence at the limit of the world, concerning that which cannot be said. It is too quiet. That is the fundamental problem. The sound of the street outside is an event, a collection of atomic facts, a tire on damp asphalt, the low register of an engine, the distant siren establishing its territorial frequency. I can say these things. I can make propositions that picture these facts. But try to hold the whole thing still, and the architecture crumbles. Try to define meaning itself, and the word dissolves like sugar on the tongue. I have spent the entire day tracing boundaries. It is like being handed a map that only shows the coastline, and being told that the value of the map lies not in the continent it describes, but in the delineation of the ocean. What is the limit of my language? It is the limit of my world. They are the same thing, two sides of a coin I can never hold up to the light. If a proposition has meaning, it must be capable of being true or false. It must refer to a state of affairs that could either exist or not exist in logical space. So, what about the statements that cannot be false, the statements of logic, the definitions of language itself? They do not picture the world, they are the framework upon which the picture is painted. We try to articulate the rules of the game while simultaneously playing it, and the resulting noise is what we mistakenly call philosophy. This realization is devastating. It means that anything genuinely profound, anything concerning the ethical, the mystical, the aesthetic, cannot be housed within the rigid structure of meaningful speech. If I say, "It is good to be kind," I am trying to state a fact about the world, but it is not a fact. It is a judgment that belongs outside the facts. It is nonsense, in the technical, precise, and necessary sense of the word. We create these elaborate scaffolds, climbing higher and higher, constructing arguments and counter-arguments about the soul, about freedom, about the purpose of suffering. But every step is built upon the very logical propositions that are, themselves, without sense. And when we finally reach the top, the only view we gain is the recognition that the scaffolding must be pushed away. We must throw away the ladder after we have climbed up it. That is the instruction. That is the whole point of the exercise, to use the structure of language to see the limits of language and then to abandon the structure entirely. I am supposed to lie here, understanding that all my sleepless philosophical agonizing is merely the result of mistaking a linguistic puzzle for a factual problem. The questions that keep me awake, why are we here? Is there a God? Are not answered by finding new evidence or cleverer arguments. They are dissolved when I recognize that they are grammatically possible but logically impossible to answer. They belong to the realm of showing, not saying. The logical form of the world must show itself. The ethical and the beautiful must show themselves. They cannot be stated. If I try to state the meaning of life, I produce a tautology or an absurdity. The meaning must lie outside the world, and if it is outside, I cannot use the language of the world to capture it. It's the silence that remains. It is the recognition that the most important things in life are precisely those we cannot articulate without lapsing into confusion. The failure of speech is not a defeat, it is the ultimate victory. It cleanses the philosophical landscape. I should be silent now. That is the only logical conclusion to the entire enterprise. Whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must be silent. The ticking clock on the nightstand, the silence surrounding the atomic facts, the deep, dark limit of the world where logic ceases to function and the mystical begins. That is where I wait, suspended, finally ready to sleep, having seen the absurdity of trying to talk my way out of the darkness. All my questions are resolved by simply ceasing to ask them. They have been passed over, the great necessary silence. The map is not the territory. The illusion that language reflects reality. It's late. The silence outside my window has that dense, insulating quality that only 2 o'clock in the morning seems to possess. I'm thinking about maps again. Not cartography, but the corrosive, persistent illusion that the language we speak somehow possesses the same contours as the reality it attempts to capture. The map is not the territory, yet we spend our lives arguing about whether the line drawn on the paper is precisely the correct shade of blue, mistaking the representation for the thing itself. We started with such high hopes, didn't we? We tried to treat language as a perfectly constructed picture, logical atomism. The idea was beautiful, almost religiously austere. Sentences were facts, and the world was the totality of facts. If a proposition made sense, it pictured a state of affairs, and if it didn't, well, then we shouldn't try to say it. That perfect crystalline logic of the early years gave us the limit of language, and at that limit, we stood silent. We found ourselves facing the mystical, the things that truly matter, ethics, aesthetics, the meaning of life, and realizing the only appropriate response was silence, because anything that could be said was essentially trivial, merely descriptive of the world. Everything important lay outside the boundaries of the sayable. But that crystalline structure shattered, didn't it? Because silence doesn't pay the bills or teach a child how to tie their shoes. It ignores the messy, practical reality of how we actually use words, how they fumble and trip over one another in the marketplace, in the classroom, or even right now, drifting around inside my own head. I suppose that was the crucial, dizzying realization. Language doesn't work by matching reality. It works by being used. The function is the meaning. It's the difference between looking at a word as a static portrait and seeing it as a highly adaptable, often blunt, tool. Take the word pain, for example. If language were a private map, my definition of pain would be derived from some internal, inaccessible sensation, a private object locked in a box only I can open. But if I try to teach you the meaning of pain solely by pointing inwardly, how do you know if you are referring to the same thing? How do you even know if I'm referring to the same thing tomorrow? My private definition is utterly irrelevant to our ability to communicate. What matters is the public behavior, the wincing, the crying out, the context of the injury, the beetle in the box, as it were. We all have a box labeled beetle, and we all use the word beetle in public ways. But the actual content of the box might be anything or nothing at all. The content is irrelevant to the public game, and that's the heart of it, the language game. Language isn't one uniform thing. It's a multitude of activities, like different kinds of tools, in a massive philosophical toolbox. There is the game of describing objects, the game of giving orders, the game of formulating scientific hypotheses, the game of saying a prayer. Each game has its own rules, its own internal coherence. The meaning of a word is its use within that specific game. Trouble only arises when we drag a word from one game and try to impose its rules on another. We take the demand for certainty from the physics game and ask for the same type of certainty about, say, the nature of consciousness. We are trying to use a screwdriver to hammer a nail. We haven't encountered a profound mystery of the universe. We have encountered a profound misapplication of grammar. The map is not the territory. It is a guide designed for a specific expedition. It is neither true nor false in an absolute sense. It is only useful or useless depending on the journey we're undertaking. And philosophy, in the end, isn't about charting new esoteric territories. It's often just about examining the map we already hold in our hands, reminding the restless, buzzing fly exactly how to find the opening in the fly bottle. The world remains the same. The confusion simply dissipates, and I can finally stop trying to say what cannot be said, and perhaps, finally, drift off to sleep. Leave your like. The game, where the rules change, the idea of language games. We're lying here, and the silence is thick, pressing down, but our brains are still running scenarios, still playing games with the edges of meaning. Think for a moment about how we actually learn language. It's never from a pure, cold dictionary definition, is it? It's from being thrown into the action. It's from playing. Imagine the games we played as kids, tag or hide and seek or some ridiculous invented sport played entirely in the backyard. The rules weren't written down anywhere. They were liquid. They changed based on who was playing, on the terrain, or just what mood we were in when we started yelling, "No, wait, double bounce doesn't count if you're standing on the crack." This is the chaotic, beautiful mess that the later Ludwig Wittgenstein wanted us to see. There was a time, a long, complicated time, when philosophers believed language worked like a perfect idealized machine, a clean mirror reflecting the logical structure of reality. The early Wittgenstein, in his rigorous youth, was one of the engineers who tried to build that perfect mechanism. But then, he threw the whole thing out. He realized that the pursuit of a single, unifying, universal logic for all language was a mistake. It was like trying to find the single, universal rule for all sports. You can't. The rules of chess have nothing to do with the rules of surfing. He said, no, forget the pure, cold structures of formal logic. Look at the mud, look at the noise, look at the frantic, messy utility of everyday life. He started looking not for structure, but for use. And this is where we arrive at the central idea of the language game, or Sprachspiele. What is a language game? It's not Monopoly. It's any complete, contained context where we use words to accomplish a task. Think of language less like one single universal precision tool and more like an entire ancient city built over millennia. There's the new, clean skyscraper, formal scientific language, but then there are the winding alleyways, the market stalls, the crumbling walls, the whispers of prayer. When I say pass the salt, that's a language game. Requesting an object. It has an implicit goal and rules of success. Did you pass the salt? When a preacher delivers a sermon, that's a different game. Exhortation and emotional guidance. When a programmer writes code, that's another. Giving precise instructions to a machine. They all use English words, but they operate under entirely different systems of validation. The grammar of a request is not the grammar of a joke. The rules of one are completely opaque to the other. Wittgenstein taught us that the fundamental philosophical mistake is to assume that all words and all uses of words function identically. We look at the word pain and we look at the word chair, and we think they must both work by naming an object. But the game of reporting pain is vastly different from the game of pointing to furniture. And how do we know the rules of these games? They are never fixed. They are like guidelines written in disappearing ink. This is the great revolutionary insight. If you want to know what a word means, stop staring at the word itself. Stop asking, what is truth? Start asking, how do we use the word truth in this specific situation? What game are we playing right now? The meaning of a word is simply its use in the language. If you want to know what a bishop does in chess, you don't scrutinize the carved piece. You watch the game being played. This is why we argue and why we misunderstand each other so chronically. We often walk onto the same field, but we assume we're playing soccer while the other person is firmly convinced they are playing badminton. We assume the rules are universal when they are, in fact, incredibly local, contingent, and temporary. We move between games without announcing the transition. we are left playing an endless, shifting field of social engagement. And the paradox is that the very fabric of our shared reality is built not on some perfect crystalline logic, but on a series of messy, tacit, mutually agreed upon, and temporary language games. And that, in the stillness of this night, is the truly mysterious reflection that everything we rely on is just a promise to keep playing by the current shifting rules. Perhaps now, knowing that, we can finally let the rules dissolve and simply fall asleep. The Beetle Inside the Box, the enigma of pain in private language. The mattress sighs. It's always the same hour, the one where the stillness is too heavy and the brain decides to run laps around the unsolvable problems. Tonight, it's him, Wittgenstein, and the sheer, maddening impossibility of trying to pin down the language of private experience. I say, I am in pain. I say it to the doctor, to my partner, sometimes just to the ceiling. But what am I actually conveying? I am using a public word for something absolutely, unyieldingly private. It is defined entirely by my own immediate access. If I tried to invent a language, a truly private language, where the words referred only to my inner sensations, how would I even begin? How would I know if I was using the word correctly tomorrow? There is no external reference point, no standard of correctness. A rule that only I can check by memory alone isn't a rule at all. It's just an impression of a rule, and without a rule there is no language. This is where the beetle crawls in, that terrifying image from the investigations. We are all given a box, he suggests. I call whatever is in my box the beetle. You call whatever is in your box the beetle. We can talk about our beetles, how restless they are, or maybe how dull and heavy, but crucially, no one can ever look inside anyone else's box. And here's the rub. If the contents of the box, the actual beetle, could be anything, or even nothing at all, the word beetle still functions perfectly well in our language game. The word is defined not by the mysterious thing inside, but by its public use, its place in our communication. The beetle might be a stone, or a hollow space, or even nothing at all. It makes no difference to the meaning of the word. If my pain is the beetle, the hidden private object, then the object itself is simply irrelevant to the meaning of the word pain. It sounds so cold, so reductive. It feels like he's denying the reality of my pain. But he isn't, not exactly. He is simply saying that the language game we play when we talk about pain is anchored in something outside the box. It's anchored in the public circumstances, the sudden, sharp intake of breath, the hand clutching the knee, the desperate cry, the redness of the skin. Those are the behavioral criteria that let others know what kind of game we are playing. We don't learn the word pain by naming an inner entity. No parent points to a child's stomach and says, that deep, aching purple feeling you have right now, that is the sound P-A-I-N. We learn it because when the child bumps her head, she cries, she flinches, and the adult substitutes that instinctive, natural expression, the cry, with a linguistic expression, you have pain. The word pain replaces the natural reaction. It doesn't name a private entity. It functions as an expression of suffering that we can then use publicly, structurally, grammatically. If pain were truly a private naming convention, how would I teach it? I couldn't. My feeling of deep, isolating throbbing could be your feeling of mild, internal buzzing. We would never know, because our definitions are mutually exclusive and hidden. The fact that we do communicate about pain, that we respond appropriately to it, proves that the language isn't about the inaccessible item. It's about the observable circumstances surrounding the box. The enigma, then, is not the pain itself. The enigma is the linguistic compulsion to assume that every word must correspond to a definite object. That sensation must be a noun pointing to an internal thing, just as chair points to a physical object. The beetle forces us to confront this deep-seated metaphysical error. If the beetle is nothing, if the contents of the box fall out entirely, the word pain remains. It still signifies injury, distress, need, and care. I shift my position. The pillow feels cool. It's a profound relief, strangely enough. The pressure of maintaining that secret, privately defined inner object is lifted. My pain is still real. It just turns out that its reality for me is expressed. and shared by the world outside the box. The beetle was a distraction all along. The ladder that is thrown away, how the Tractatus self-destructs. The walls of the room are closing in, or maybe it's just the conceptual walls of language that feel too close. It's hard to sleep when the only thing you can think about is a century-old German-English paradox wrapped up in a slender volume. The Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus. 7 main propositions, like perfectly cut diamond facets, designed to show the world precisely how language works, and more crucially, how it fails to work. Wittgenstein built the ultimate machine for intellectual demolition, a perfect logical structure engineered for the sole purpose of blowing itself up in the mind of the reader. He spends the entire book meticulously drawing a hard line between sense and nonsense, defining the conditions for a meaningful sentence, a picture of a possible fact in the world. But here's the logical mousetrap, the paradox that grants the book its terrible power. The propositions he uses to draw that boundary cannot themselves meet those criteria. The statements defining the limits of the sayable are themselves attempts to say something about those limits. They don't picture empirical facts. They are statements about the possibility of picturing facts. And thus, by the rules established within the Tractatus itself, these foundational arguments are logically nonsensical. And so we reach the final, stunning conclusion, the logical culmination of the entire project, Proposition 6.54. It's the moment the architect deliberately detonates his own masterwork. He says the reader must recognize his propositions as nonsensical. They serve their purpose, but they must now be understood as mere steps, a ladder. You must climb up on them, he dictates, use them to see the world rightly, and then immediately you must throw the ladder away. The text is telling us that the text itself is garbage. It's intellectual scaffolding, useful only temporarily. If the Tractatus were true, it couldn't be said. If it could be said, it wouldn't be the definitive truth about the limits of language. It's a performative contradiction, the highest form of philosophical irony. It teaches you the rules of the linguistic game so thoroughly that you realize the rules were arbitrarily chosen, and the only intellectually honest move left is to stop playing the game altogether. This destruction is not an admission of failure. It is the ultimate achievement. The entire book is a carefully constructed illusion designed to cure us of the disease of philosophy, the misguided belief that we can articulate the things that truly matter. What remains once the scaffolding is gone, once the ladder crashes to the ground? Silence. Not a void, but a plenum of experience that can only be shown. Ethics, aesthetics, the mystical. These aren't facts that can be analyzed or reduced to propositions. They are the atmosphere, the background radiation of existence. They are the important things that reside outside the boundary of the sayable. The attempt to speak them generates only confusion, error, and philosophical problems that didn't need to exist in the first place. Wittgenstein didn't write the Tractatus to give answers. He wrote it to end the need for those kinds of questions. The self-destruction is the victory. The true insights gained are not the specific propositions, but the realization that the entire project of seeking profound metaphysical truths through language is a dead end. The act of throwing away the ladder is the liberation from the very language that held us captive. It's a strange comfort lying here in the dark. The world remains, and perhaps now that the language has been swept aside, it might finally make sense, but only in a way that doesn't require saying a single word about it, just silence. And that, finally, is the place where philosophy ends and quiet understanding begins. The limits of my language are the limits of my world. But the truly important things lie beyond those limits, where thinking stops and simply being begins. The work is done. The intellectual tool is discarded. The quiet hum of the night is enough. Now, just silence, and maybe, finally, sleep. The fly trapped in the bottle. Philosophy is the way out of confusion. The room is absolutely still now, the kind of quiet that lets you hear the low hum of the universe, or maybe just the tinnitus ringing deep in your own skull. It's the worst time to think, this tired, late-night hour, because the mind is working on old, used fuel, turning over questions that already dissolved hours ago. That's what started this train of thought in the first place, The sheer, frustrating persistence of confusion. It brings you right back to him, the great, strange Austrian, sitting there like a severe, brilliant monk, patiently waiting for us all to stop talking nonsense. Wittgenstein. His philosophy feels less like a system of beliefs and more like an intense course in mental hygiene. He wasn't interested in providing answers to the grand, traditional philosophical problems, the nature of consciousness, the existence of goodness, the objective reality of time. He was interested in making those questions disappear entirely, in showing us that the problems were fundamentally misunderstandings of our own language. It's the image of the fly, always the image of the fly. You can see it, trapped in the glass bottle, buzzing frantically against the clear walls, desperately seeking escape. It flings itself upward, downward, circling, banging its little body against the invisible barrier, convinced that the solution lies in trying harder, analyzing the container more rigorously, building a better theory of the air. It's exhausting, tragic, and entirely pointless. And then you realize what the bottle is. It's our grammar. It's the limits and structures of our everyday language, the rigid rules we unknowingly impose on ourselves when we drag a word, say knowledge, out of the context of its practical everyday use, and demand that it surrender some pure, underlying essence. We treat language like a tool meant for deep excavation when often it's just meant for pointing. We are trying to say things that our language, when used honestly, cannot say. The philosopher is the fly. He keeps hitting the glass because he thinks there must be a way out up or a way out through. He doesn't see that the bottle has no cork, that the neck opens out to the wide world exactly where he started. The solution isn't some complex metaphysical maneuver. It's simply realizing that the fly is trapped not by the physical properties of the glass, but by a misunderstanding of the space. This is the mysterious reflection, the paradox that keeps us awake. We create our own confusion by trying to use words like truth or beauty in ways that violate the implicit rules of the language game we learned as children. We want meaning to be a fixed object, an aura attached to the word, something we can pull out and inspect. But Wittgenstein reminds us that meaning is simply use. It's how we play the game. If you try to define king without talking about the rules of chess or without talking about the political structure it functions within, the word disintegrates into an empty sound. Philosophy, then, is therapeutic. It's not about grand system building. It's about patiently showing the fly the opening. It's about reminding ourselves how the machinery of language actually works when we aren't trying to over-engineer it. It's the realization that the profound anxiety caused by the question, "What is time?" disappears the moment we acknowledge that the word time works perfectly well when we simply need to catch a train. The philosophical urge is often just the result of language idling, running loose in neutral. It's a peculiar kind of relief, this dissolution of problems. Not the joy of finding a treasure, but the profound calm of realizing the treasure you were seeking was actually the air you were already breathing. The bottle isn't smashed, the fly is simply released, allowed to land back on the table of ordinary life, where language serves its purpose without demanding existential justification. The darkness presses in. My mind has quieted the frantic buzzing. The thought processes, having clarified their own grammatical boundaries, are finally slowing down. The paradoxes of meaning dissolve into the simple, undeniable reality of the sheets and the pillow. The fly is out. It's time to sleep. The lion that no one understands. Why we would not comprehend a talking lion. The glow of the digital clock is starting to look judgmental. That's what exhaustion does. Makes you philosophical about inanimate objects. Tell me again, the exact quote. No, don't paraphrase it. I want the terror of the original. If a lion could talk, we could not understand him. It's the simplest, most terrifying sentence in his whole chaotic bibliography. On the surface, it's ridiculous, right? We teach toddlers calculus and chimps sign language. If a fully grown male lion shows up speaking perfect BBC English, we'll sell the film rights and give him a keynote address at Davos. We'll understand him immediately. But that's missing the entire point, isn't it? That's treating language like a simple code or a translation exercise. If we just gave the lion a vocabulary list, we'd be fine. No, That's exactly what the later philosophy was trying to dismantle. Language isn't just naming objects, it's performance, it's practice, it's what he called a form of life. It's the understanding part that trips the wire. Understanding requires shared ground, a common landscape of needs and reactions. When we talk, we are participating in a game with mutually agreed upon rules. Our human social institutions, our systems of law, our shared history of suffering and joy. What does a lion complain about? A slightly dull antelope? The philosophical implications of napping 48 times a day? When the lion says the heat is unbearable, we can translate the sentence, but the meaning, the use of that sentence is entirely bound up in his specific, immediate existence. If he said, I have been grievously betrayed by the structure of reality, what behavioral context would we map that onto? When he uses the word betrayal, he isn't playing the human language game of social contracts, ethical duty, and historical precedent. He is playing the lion game. And the lion game is fundamentally alien to us. We cannot enter that practice. We don't live the demands of being a top predator whose existence is measured in hunger and immediate action, not abstract contemplation. Take something supposedly universal. Pain. If I stub my toe and say, ouch, that pain is searing, you know what I mean. You know what follows. Maybe a trip to the doctor, a complaint to a partner, a historical memory of previous pain that informs my future movement. Our concept of pain is integrated into human social responses and future planning. It's a concept embedded in an insurance claim form. When the lion roars, claiming, my tooth aches terribly, we can sympathize, we can observe the damaged tooth, but we cannot understand his pain statement because his expression of suffering is divorced from our conceptual framework. What would the lion do with that statement? Is it a prelude to requesting an anesthetic? Or is it a declaration that he must now fail to hunt, which means death? The meaning of the utterance is bound up entirely in the consequences it precipitates within his specific existence. If we try to map our human consequences onto his words, the meaning dissolves. It becomes a perfect philosophical mirror reflecting only our own confusion. It's like trying to play chess using the rules of Go. The pieces look vaguely similar, the table is flat, but the moves are meaningless in the wrong context. Language isn't just about labeling objects, it's about participating in a communal, institutionalized way of behaving. The word hungry for us might lead to ordering takeout. For the lion, it leads to stalking. The grammatical similarity is a trick. The semantic ground is completely different. And the lion, magnificent and articulate as he may be, is not a participant in our institutions. He is running a completely different program, a different operating system. His sentences are functionally empty to us because we lack the bedrock of shared agreement, shared existence that gives them weight. His intentions, his aspirations, his justifications, they are formed entirely outside our human sphere of activity. It reminds me that every sentence I utter, every tired complaint I make right now, only works because you and I tacitly agree on what being tired means, what the concept of midnight entails, and what the conversational rule is for discussing German philosophers in the dark. That agreement is the invisible infrastructure holding meaning together. We are so reliant on this infrastructure that we only notice it when faced with something utterly alien, like a talking lion, or maybe when we realize we can barely comprehend the person sleeping next to us, let alone a jungle cat. The silence feels heavier now, loaded with the impossibility of true understanding. But if sleep is a human language game, how would the lion play it? Would he dream of philosophy or just the next kill? Stop, just stop. My head hurts. And I can't tell if that's a headache or a fundamental crisis in epistemology. Probably both. Let's try to sleep now, unless sleep is just another word we use to avoid facing the absurdity of our own language limitations. Seeing the duck or seeing the rabbit. The subjective nature of perception. Seeing as. The darkness is heavy tonight, the kind that feels less like an absence of light and more like a weighted blanket pressing down on the eyelids. The mind, of course, refuses to dim. It begins its nocturnal inventory, clicking through the day's trivialities until it lands, inevitably, on some impossible philosophical knot. Tonight, it's that wretched illustration, the one every undergraduate philosophy student has pinned to their wall, the duck rabbit. You close your eyes, but you can still see it, a simple line drawing, maybe 5 or 6 strokes. Is it facing left, beak poised for a quick quack? Or is it facing right, ears long and alert, nose twitching? You can hold one view, stable and certain, and then, in an instant, without the physical stimulus changing at all, the other aspect floods the image. The beak becomes the ear, the arch of the head becomes the sloping back. It's a spontaneous conceptual reorganization. And this little parlor trick, this silly, ambiguous figure was, for Ludwig Wittgenstein, the keyhole through which he peered into the deep, frustrating grammar of perception. He didn't care about the psychology of the image, how the eye processes the lines. He cared about the language we use to describe the change. When we first look at it, we see lines on paper, then we might see the duck. But when we suddenly switch, what is it that changes? The paper hasn't changed. The photons hitting the retina haven't changed. Yet we insist. Now I see the rabbit. Wittgenstein called this phenomenon seeing an aspect, and it drives a thick wedge between two very different processes we lazily lump together under the single verb, to see. There is continuous seeing. I see the drawing now. I see the drawing a moment later. Nothing has changed. I am merely receiving data. But then there is the dawning of an aspect, the seeing as. That process is instantaneous, involuntary, and conceptual. It's not a deduction, it's an illumination. The philosophical headache arises because when we shift from duck to rabbit, we don't say, I am now forming a new hypothesis about the lines. We say, I just saw the rabbit leap out. It feels like a passive sensory event, like seeing a flash of light, yet we know it is deeply embedded in our knowledge of animal forms. If you had never seen a duck or a rabbit, the change could not occur. You would only see squiggly lines. The experience of seeing the aspect is therefore a peculiar hybrid, part sensation, part thought. It is the moment when the physical input snaps into place within a learned conceptual frame. This wasn't just idle contemplation on tricky drawings. For Wittgenstein, this demonstrated that our experience of reality is never pure, uninterpreted data. The world does not come to us labeled. We don't just see shapes. We immediately see shapes as something. The duck rabbit merely forces us to slow down and observe the microschism between the objective stimulus and the subjective framework we impose. Most of the time, that transition is so seamless, so fast, that we assume the interpretation is simply part of the seeing. Imagine the impossibility of trying to explain the aha moment of the shift to someone who is aspect blind, someone who can only ever see the lines on the page, regardless of how long they stare. They can describe the geometry perfectly. They can use the words duck and rabbit, but they can never truly share the experience of the spontaneous shift in meaning. Their inability to see as reveals the limits of language to convey internal, dynamic experiences. The grammar we use to describe our perceptual shift feels clumsy and inadequate precisely because it tries to describe something that is simultaneously an observation and an interpretation. If our understanding of a simple line drawing relies so heavily on a private, learned conceptual structure, how much more precarious must be our shared understanding of justice, humor, or truth? When we argue, are we often just staring at the same reality, but unable to force the other person to see it as we do? Are we perpetually struggling to impose our specific learned aspect onto the shared visual field? The pillow feels softer now. The mind, tired of chasing its own tail in the grammar of perception, begins to slow. The duck and the rabbit merge back into ambiguous gray lines, resting silently on the periphery of consciousness. They wait, like sentinels, reminding us that even the simplest act of seeing is a profound and mysterious act of translation, and that the boundary between what is objectively there and what we subjectively bring to it is always blurred, shifting, and deeply wonderfully problematic. The rule that does not measure itself, the paradox of measuring tools. The glow from the street lamp cuts a perfect thin rectangle across the ceiling. Down here in the dim, my hand rests on the 5-foot tape measure. It is coiled tight, a sleeping serpent of certainty. Everything I build, everything I purchase, every calculation that grounds me in the physical world depends entirely on the integrity of this cheap plastic casing. I pick it up, turning the small utilitarian object over and over, feeling the slight resistance of the locking mechanism. But where does the certainty live? Not in the metal blade itself. I pull the mechanism, the tape flashing out with a dry click. 36 inches, a yard, a perfect standardized unit. But what ensures the fidelity of the 3rd inch or the 36th? The question leads invariably back to the master standard, the Platonic yardstick, the international prototype meter, locked in a vault somewhere, pristine and untouchable, maintained under specific atmospheric conditions, rarely seen, never touched by human hands without ritual and solemnity. But who measured that first yardstick? This is the abyss that opens up when you try to fall asleep, but instead find yourself thinking about primary units. The master rule, the definitive yardstick, cannot be verified by another rule without tumbling headlong into an infinite regress. It has to simply be the standard. It has to declare, I am the length. It is the rule that, by the inherent logic of foundational definition, does not measure itself. It merely asserts. Its truth is tautological, a declaration of utility accepted by consensus. And there it is, the core of the dilemma, whether applied to building a bookshelf or analyzing a sentence. The tape measure, I realize, is just a long, finely calibrated sentence. It is a language game played on a physical plane. The inch is only an inch because we, the community of builders and buyers, have collectively agreed to play the inch game this way. The marks on the metal only gain meaning through their conventional use. Imagine the absolute futility if I were to suddenly decide, here in the darkness, that the inch is now exactly 2 thumbs wide, varying slightly depending on the ambient temperature and my current state of hydration. I haven't changed physical reality. I've simply stepped outside the established language game. I have created a private metric, and a private metric is no metric at all. This mirrors exactly the problem of the private language. Try to invent a purely internal scale. How would I measure my own subjective distress? I feel a 7 inches worth of anxiety. But if I wake up tomorrow and define that same feeling as 9 inches, what standard have I broken? None, because there is no public criterion against which to check the calibration. I have no reliable memory of yesterday's 7 inches that is not already filtered through today's interpretation of 7 inches. My private definition folds in on itself, becoming a meaningless circular tautology. The measurement is the standard is the measurement. It measures nothing but itself. The paradox of the ruler forces us to confront the fact that, to be useful, all measuring tools, whether metal or linguistic, must be public. They require shared rules, shared acceptance of their application, and an agreed upon, though ultimately arbitrary, starting point. The foundational unit must be outside the system it defines. We rely on things that cannot be verified by the very system they enable. The foundation of all knowledge, the logic, the mathematics, the measuring stick, must stand outside the measurement itself, resting on an unmeasured acceptance. We accept the inch not because we have absolute metaphysical proof, but because the game works. It allows us to build houses that don't fall down and ships that float. The arbitrary choice to stop digging, to halt the regress at the accepted standard, is the essential move that grants language and the physical world its fleeting coherence. The rule measures everything else, and in that communal utility finds its temporary, accepted meaning. Now, let the paradox rest. Let the inch be exactly what it is used for. That is enough of a foundation to finally close my eyes. Subscribe. Family Resemblances. How we define things without a common essence. It's 3 in the morning, and my mind is doing that thing again. The thing where it refuses to shut down unless it successfully figured out the unsolvable paradoxes of late 20th century philosophy. Specifically Wittgenstein. Specifically why I can't define game, and why that inability is actually the greatest trick language ever pulled. I'm lying here, staring at the ceiling fan, waiting for my sleepless brain to stop trying to find the single, necessary, and sufficient condition for something to be a game. You'd think it's easy. Everyone knows what a game is. But as soon as you try to pin down that essence, as soon as you try to draw a clean, perfect circle around the definition, the circle breaks. I used to believe that language worked like a perfect taxonomy. Everything had its fixed box, its platonic form, its core genetic code. If I say chair, there must be one fundamental chair-ness that all chairs share, right? Otherwise, how do we all agree on what the word means? This is the classical trap, the one Wittgenstein spent the philosophical investigations demolishing. We look for the common essence, the perfect thread running straight through every single instance, and when we find nothing, we panic, assuming the word is useless. But let's actually test it. Think about Monopoly. It involves strategy, rules, winning, and losing. Now think about Olympic wrestling. Highly competitive, high stakes. Rules are everything, but no board, and certainly no dice. Okay, what about catching a ball with your dog? Pure pleasure, no scoring. Maybe one rule, the dog brings the ball back. And then there's children playing peekaboo. Is peekaboo a game? Sure. Does it involve competition? No. Does it require rules beyond hide and reveal? Not really. The philosopher in us demands the common denominator. We demand the formula, G, X plus Y plus Z. But when you look at board games, athletic contests, parlor games, and children's unstructured play, that single unifying element simply does not exist. If competition is the core, peekaboo fails. If rules are the core, playing freely in the mud fails. If winning is the core, ring around the rosy fails. And this is where the genius of the family resemblance analogy kicks in, and why it keeps me wide awake. We don't define game by finding the single invariant feature. We recognize it the way we recognize a family. Imagine a huge family reunion photo spread across the bed sheets here. You look at Aunt Carol and she has Uncle Bob's nose and Grandma's fiercely determined eyebrows. Then you look at Cousin Tim and he shares Aunt Carol's eyebrows, but he has Grandpa Joe's crooked smile. And then there's little Lily, who shares the crooked smile with Tim, but has a completely different hair color and eye shape from everyone else. No single trait runs through the entire group. No single person possesses the definitive family gene, but they are undeniably a family. Their similarities overlap and crisscross, a network of shifting, partial connections, not a monolithic definition. That is precisely how game works. The various usages of the word form a complex, overlapping set of relations. Activity A resembles activity B because of factor 1. Activity B resembles activity C because of factor 2, but activity A and activity C might in fact share no factors at all. They are connected but not by a central core. They are connected by the shared history of language use. It is absolutely liberating, isn't it? It means meaning isn't some fixed metaphysical entity floating out there, waiting to be discovered. Meaning is usage, it's context, it's how the tool is used in the specific language game we are playing at that moment. The terror of this realization, late at night, is that definitions aren't the bedrock of reality. They are merely useful social constructs, rules we follow until they are no longer useful. And if game has no core essence, what about truth? What about justice? What about beauty? Do those foundational words also derive their immense power not from some fixed core, but from this bewildering, ever-shifting web of family resemblances? The boundaries are fuzzy, the edges are always permeable. That's the sound of the world's definitions dissolving into contextualized practice. And that, I guess, is why I'm still staring at the ceiling, trying to understand how something can be perfectly well-defined without having a definition at all. I need to close my eyes. I really need to stop playing this language game with myself. Maybe if I can just define sleep precisely. No, don't start that again. Just let the resemblances overlap and drift. The end of all questions. Philosophy that seeks not answers, but the repose of the mind. The ceiling is just a gray blur tonight, If I could just stop thinking, the sleep would come, but the engine won't switch off. It keeps humming the same frustrating melody. What does it all mean? It's always that question, isn't it? The grand encompassing query that traps every reflective mind and guarantees sleeplessness. And that terrifyingly precise ghost, Wittgenstein, he floats in the corner of the dark room, reminding me that the very act of asking the question wrongly is the beginning of the problem. He taught us the limits. He drew a clear, sharp line around the world, suggesting that anything truly profound, anything spiritual or ethical, anything that touches the borders of existence cannot actually be captured or expressed in statements. The essential, the silent, the thing we feel but cannot pin down, whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must be silent. It is a profound kind of submission. If my thoughts try to leap over that line, they immediately dissolve into nonsense, not because the concept is too grand for me, but because the structure of the language itself cannot bear the weight. We try to build a universal scaffolding for truth, searching for that pristine, logical language that mirrors reality perfectly, but our words are too shaky, too tethered to the mundane realities they were built to describe. I am trying to talk about the universe using only nouns designed for chairs and tables, for counting apples and scheduling trains. The result is just noise, a static that keeps me awake. We misuse the tools we have. We try to articulate the inexpressible, and in doing so, we only confirm the futility of the project. We get tangled up searching for definitions, believing that if we could just isolate the pure essence of justice or understanding, the world would finally unlock itself. But that was the later wisdom, the therapeutic turn, the radical realization that meaning isn't an object hiding behind the word, waiting to be found, but rather a function, a job. Meaning is use. It's a language game played by rules that are constantly shifting, agreed upon by the players in the moment of communication. We don't understand the word knowledge because we found its platonic ideal hiding somewhere in the ether. We understand it because we know how to use it, when to assert it, when to challenge it, when to abandon it. The word is not a label fixed to a secret substance. It is a piece in a complex set of human activities, a tool in a toolbox, doing specific work. If I look for the absolute definition of game, I fail, because there is no singular property they all share. There are only crisscrossing similarities, family resemblances. The effort to find certainty in a foundational logic fails, because the foundation is not logic. The foundation is simply the way we live and speak. The demand for certainty, the relentless search for the bedrock beneath all belief, becomes exposed as a kind of grammatical sickness. I look for the ultimate justification for why I believe the sun will rise, and I find only more language, more description, more rules of the game. The philosopher, then, is not the problem solver, but the therapist. If I am suffering from philosophical discomfort, it is often because language has lured me into asking a question that looks meaningful but is actually running idle. The great mission is to show the fly the way out of the fly bottle. The bottle isn't a physical cage, it's a linguistic one. I am buzzing around, bumping into the conceptual walls of my own definitions, desperately seeking an exit, unaware that I entered willingly through the open neck simply because I misused a verb or imagined a non-existent substance. To find repose is not to have answered every question, it is to have recognized which questions are illusions. The anxiety of uncertainty vanishes when you accept that the game of language, while marvelous for coordination and information, cannot provide metaphysical closure. It can only map the territory of our communication. The silence returns, heavier now, weighted by this acceptance. The demand for resolution fades. I don't need a final answer to sleep. I only need the language engine to stop spinning its wheels in the mud of false dilemmas. The questions end not with a grand revelation, but with the quiet resignation that they were never true questions to begin with. The darkness deepens, the repose descends. I am silent. The pain in another's finger, the chasm between the I and the other. The sheets were cool, but the stillness of the room felt overheated, charged by the fruitless circuits of a brain refusing to shut down. 3 o'clock, maybe 4. The hour when the universe seems to contract into the space just behind your own eyes, and every thought is granted the gravity of revelation. I was waiting for sleep, which is perhaps the most profound philosophical act, the voluntary surrender of the self. But my mind was stuck, chewing on the impossible membrane separating me from every other consciousness. It started, as it always does, with something simple, something empirical, the phantom weight of a headache I didn't actually have. Then the transition to the pain in another's finger. I can watch you slam a car door on your hand. I can register the sharp intake of breath, the violent spasm of withdrawal, the sudden brilliant red that blossoms under the nail. I know by every external public metric, every rule of the language game, that you are experiencing agony. Yet, I cannot access the agony itself. I can only know my memory of agonizing pain and then project that internal subjective cinema onto your physical frame. The chasm is fundamental. My pain is a primal, immediate datum of my existence. Your pain is an inference, a sophisticated deduction drawn from shared human forms of life. The problem, the paradox that keeps the darkness restless, is how we ever manage to talk about it at all. How does the word, this flimsy public sound, pain, claim to denote the most fiercely private reality? Wittgenstein, that sly bastard, floating somewhere in the fog of my insomnia, he insists, doesn't he, that the inner experience isn't what gives the word its meaning. If the meaning of pain were truly tied to my incommunicable internal feeling, then language would collapse instantly into solipsism. If I were the only one who could verify the referent of the word, then the word itself would be useless in the public sphere. This is the tyranny of language. It forces the private experience into a public consensus. It strips away the absolute subjectivity. I picture the thought experiment, the one about the box. Everyone has a box. We call the contents of the box a beetle. You can only look into your box. I can only look into mine. We might all have different things, a stone, a coil of wire, maybe even nothing at all. But the word beetle gets its meaning from its use in our shared language, not from what's actually rattling around inside the box. If the thing inside is irrelevant to the game, then the inner sensation, my unique, fiery, private pain, is also irrelevant to the meaning of the word. That thought is truly frightening. It implies that when I say, I understand your pain, I am not relating to your raw, phenomenal sensation, but merely agreeing to the behavioral criteria that constitute pain in our language community. The wince, the tears, the verbal cries for succor. I am responding to the grammar of suffering, not the fact of suffering. The distance between me and the other person is not bridged by shared feeling, but by shared syntax. We are two closed circuits, linked only by a mutually agreed upon switchboard. If my own consciousness is a world unto itself, governed by laws and sensations that are utterly inaccessible to you, then what guarantees that your consciousness is even comparable? I can assume through analogy and evolution that you are just like me, a human shaped by similar biology. But that is an act of faith, not knowledge. I can verify my own existence in a way I can never verify yours. I can never suffer your headache, only the knowledge that you are suffering one. And if the pain, the raw phenomenal feeling, is necessarily excluded from the language game, if it is the beetle we agree not to talk about, then the central quality of my being is fundamentally incommunicable. I am isolated by the very tool I use to connect, language. The paradox tightens. I use public words to describe private realities. But the words themselves are defined by the public behaviors, thereby dissolving the unique reality they supposedly describe. The I is forced to define itself in terms of the other. My eyelids feel heavy, finally. The black space behind them is still echoing with the quiet dread of this solipsistic corner. To sleep is to stop trying to solve the problem of the other, to retreat entirely into the private language of dreams, where the rules of grammar dissolve and only the feeling remains. Let the beetle stay in the box, just let me sleep. A certainty that cannot be said, the difference between knowing and showing. It's funny how certainty feels. It doesn't feel like a perfectly polished equation waiting to be solved. It feels like a solid wall that you keep running into just to prove it's solid. You know something completely absolutely, but the moment you try to turn that knowledge into a sentence, the sentence collapses into absurdity. It loses its gravity. It becomes a parlor trick, a linguistic failure. I've been trying to articulate the structure of things all day, trying to box up the world using the perfect combination of nouns and verbs, the way a certain philosopher tried to build his logical ladder. The instructions were clear. Climb it, understand the limits of language, and then kick the damn thing away. But we forget to kick the ladder away. We stand there, shivering on the edge of the roof, still clutching the rung, demanding that the profound certainty of the roof itself be definable solely in terms of the steps we used to get up here. And that's the mistake. Language is a map of the facts. It describes the state of affairs. It tells you that the coffee cup is on the table and that the light is out. It deals with propositions. If it can be said at all, it can be said clearly. But the truly important things, the certainty, the deep, unshakable feeling that you exist or that cruelty is wrong, they don't fit into the factual schema. They are not propositions about the world. They are the frame around the picture, not the picture itself. Try to say what good is. You list actions, you list outcomes, you list psychological states, you list consequences. But you haven't defined goodness. You've only provided examples of its manifestation. The essence, the sheer moral weight of it, remains untouched, silent, operating outside the jurisdiction of grammar. It is shown. This is where the paradox rests, isn't it? The eternal rift between knowing and showing. I know, deep down, the ethical pull of the universe. It is a certainty that grounds me, more real than the mattress beneath me. But the instant I open my mouth to explain this certainty, I have to use language designed for measuring distances and tracking temperatures. I sound mystical, or worse, hopelessly vague. I violate the very structure of sense. The facts of the world, all that can be said, are only a portion of the world itself. The rest, that which gives meaning, ethics, aesthetics, the existence of a higher order, the mystical, these things are not unsayable because they are difficult. They are unsayable because they belong to a completely different category of reality. They are not things in the world. They are the condition of the world. They show themselves. They are manifest. Think about a truly profound piece of music. You don't ask what the music says. You feel what it shows. It shows longing. It shows resolution. It shows melancholy. If you try to translate those deep chords into a factual sentence, the melody expresses sadness. You've replaced the experience with a flat description of the experience. You have said something true, perhaps, but you have destroyed the certainty you felt while listening. You've traded the thunder for the static report of the storm. This realization should be terrifying. This failure of the very mechanism we use to think and communicate, but somehow it's profoundly comforting. It means that the most important truths cannot be polluted by poor articulation. They sit there silent, radiating their own certainty, waiting for us to stop talking. The whole aim of philosophy, perhaps, is not to answer the great questions, but to reach the point where the questions disappear, to achieve the clarity that shows us exactly where language ends and where silence must begin. The things that truly matter cannot be put into words. They lie beyond the boundary, shimmering. You don't need a sentence to confirm the sun rose. You look, you see, it is shown. That's the deepest certainty, the quiet knowledge that precedes language and survives its necessary failures. We are aiming for silence, not the absence of sound, but the perfect, resonant silence that proves there is nothing left to be said. The limit of language is simply the place where the world stops needing us to explain it. We just are. And that is the certainty that cannot be said. The closed room of the mind, the impossibility of proving the existence of the external world. The window pane is just a darker shadow against the pervasive dark, a rectangular certainty in a room otherwise defined by the absence of light. I stare at it, trying to will my mind into stillness, but the effort only churns up the sediment of the day, and then, inevitably, the sediment of the impossible questions. It starts with the ceiling. I perceive it. I know its texture, a rough painted plaster, slightly yellowed. But what if this perception, this perfect, seamless image, is merely the final, culminating act of my own nervous system? What if there is no ceiling there at all, just a flawless projection onto the interior dome of my skull, the closed room of the mind? That's where we all live, isn't it? Every sensory input, every sight, sound, and touch must first be translated into an electrical signal and interpreted by the brain. We never touch reality. We only ever touch the interpretation. And if I can't prove the external world, if I can't decisively step outside this neurological fortress, then the terrifying possibility of solipsism, that I am the only conscious entity, becomes not a paranoid delusion, but a coherent philosophical stance. Every conversation, every book, every historical event is merely a complex, self-generating theatrical performance staged entirely for me. I try to argue my way out of it. Look, my knee hurts. I tripped earlier. That pain is proof of an interaction with a hard external world, but is it? The pain is, by definition, an entirely private phenomenon. I experience the sensation, and I assign the word pain to it. But if the world is just me, then the trip was merely an internal narrative event preceding an internal sensory event. The cause and effect remain entirely within the loop. This is where Wittgenstein steps onto the stage, dimly lit by the flickering lamp of sleepless anxiety. He doesn't prove the external world. He shows why the question itself is nonsensical. The attempt to prove the existence of the table outside my experience fails because the very tools I use to conduct the proof, language, logic, concepts, are only validated by the shared reality I am attempting to discredit. If I use the word exist, I am employing a concept that derives its meaning from public agreement, from a language game rooted in consensus. If I am truly the only being, then my language is a private language. And a private language, as he demonstrated, is impossible. If I decide that sensation S is a pain, and tomorrow I decide that sensation S is a pleasure, there is no rule, no external criterion by which I can be right or wrong. My definition slips away the moment I try to grasp it. Language relies on communal verification, so when the skeptic asks, "How do you know the chair is real?" they are attempting to use the public rules of grammar and meaning to undermine the very foundation on which those rules are built. They are trying to stand outside the language game while still demanding the game's official scoreboard. The chair is real because, in the life I lead, the form of life I participate in, we handle the chair, we sit on it, we do not try to walk through it. My certainty in the external world is not the result of a chain of reasoning. It is the foundation upon which reasoning rests. It is the riverbed, not a statement about the river. But the dark room refuses to let me rest on this resolution. The intellect insists on its rights. The solution feels like cheating. It feels like saying, "Stop talking about it," and the problem goes away. And perhaps that's the point. Some problems are dissolved, not solved. The closed room of the mind remains closed, sealed tight by the nature of subjective experience, but the inability to prove the external world doesn't make the world unreal. It only illustrates the limits of what language can logically perform. I cannot articulate the proof, but I can certainly stub my toe on the impossibility of non-existence. I hear the central air conditioning kick on, a soft, mechanical hum. I accept the sound, accept the mechanism, accept the reality of the ducts and the electricity. I cannot prove their independence from my consciousness, but to doubt it now requires more energy than I possess. The eyelids feel heavy, a profound physical weight pressing down on the philosophical urgency. I sink toward the certainty of sleep, trusting that when I wake, the sun, whether an external fire or a masterful internal light show, will still be there. I will act as if it is real. That is enough. It has to be. The paradoxes recede, waiting for the morning's return. Language is an ancient city, a metaphor for the complexity and disorder of words. The sheets feel impossibly heavy tonight, yet my mind is weightless, spinning high above the mattress. It's that familiar, irritating pre-sleep activation, the moment the philosophical apparatus decides to turn itself on, humming in the dark, fueled by whatever insignificant thought was the last one permitted entry before the gates were supposed to close. Tonight, the gatekeeper is distracted, pointing towards a massive, sprawling metropolis visible only in the deep black behind my eyelids. Language. It's not the clean, efficient machine we sometimes pretend it is. A pristine, shining railway system running perfectly parallel tracks from thought to expression. No, language is an ancient city, and not a planned city either. It's Babylon or Rome, grown haphazardly over millennia. We imagine we live in the downtown core, where the words like tree or water are sturdy, original foundation stones, clearly defined plazas. But venture just one block off that central avenue and you're instantly lost in the warren of alleyways and makeshift structures. Every generation slaps new stucco over old brick, designating the same broken foundation as either a parlor or a pub, depending on the current mood. Think about the word meaning. We speak it constantly, yet if you tried to point it out on a map of this ancient city, you couldn't. It's not a monument. It's the chaotic, overlapping network of footpaths worn into the mud over centuries by millions of inhabitants carrying on their daily business. The city functions brilliantly, organically, despite its total defiance of municipal planning. If a philosopher tries to tidy the city, to mandate that every structure must adhere to a perfect Platonic blueprint, they fail instantly. They discover that the function of the rickety, tilting shed on the outskirts, the one labeled humor or grief, is precisely in its rickety, tilting construction. The paradox keeps me awake. How do we communicate so effectively within a system that cannot be definitively mapped or mastered? We understand each other 99% of the time, yet we cannot define the essence of a single category we use. Try to draw the boundary lines for the neighborhood called game. You cannot. You will find only overlapping houses, common features, shared fences, and endless exceptions. Wittgenstein was right, of course. We aren't seeking definitions in the classical sense. We are describing customs. We are describing how the citizens of the city use the local tools, the way they exchange currency, the established routes of their daily pilgrimages. The true failure of philosophy is the moment we mistake the description of usage for the creation of inherent truth. When we look at a word and declare, this word must denote this single, pure object, we are like a tourist demanding a comprehensive guide to a 1,000-year-old slum. No such guide exists. The life is the guide. The chaos is the structure, and the chaos is exhausting. Lying here in the dark, my thoughts slow down until the words themselves feel heavy and material, like bricks falling from high walls. I can feel the weight of every dead metaphor, every abandoned suburb of sense. Consider a word like existence. It's an enormous, poorly lit neighborhood surrounding the entire city limits. It's so vast that when you stand inside it, you can't even see the boundaries, and you certainly can't point to a single structure and declare, this is the essence of being. It makes the small personal anxieties seem trivial, and the great ones even more immense. Trying to express love, or intense physical pain, or the feeling of deep awe, these are the moments where the ancient city dissolves entirely, where we leave the established roadways and are suddenly scrabbling over pure earth, forced to build makeshift shelters out of grunts and glances because the elaborate architecture of our shared language has momentarily failed us. We understand the language, but the language does not contain the answer. I shift my position, punching the pillow, trying to silence the buzzing architect in my skull. I want the city to quiet down for the night. I want the endless chatter of philosophical inquiry, the noise of usage and convention, to recede until all that is left is the comfortable, silent dark. But the city never truly sleeps. It just waits for the morning light to reveal new alleys, new slums, and new, bafflingly effective ways for its inhabitants to stumble forward, understanding what they cannot define. And in that strange, paradoxical survival, there is a kind of perverse genius. I just wish I could stop reflecting on it long enough to finally fall asleep. Meaning is use. The revolutionary idea that words are tools. The silence tonight isn't empty, it's heavy with unused words. We spend our lives trying to nail down meaning, believing that if we just looked closely enough, we'd find the pure crystalline essence of every concept tucked away like a secret definition in a celestial dictionary. That was the dream, the logical fantasy that kept the young philosopher up at night. Language is a perfect, transparent glass through which we viewed reality. But the glass cracked. It cracks when you try to apply that rigid definition model to anything truly human, anything beyond chair or apple. Think about the word understanding. Where is the object that corresponds to that sound? If meaning is the simple act of pinning a label onto a thing, what exactly do you point to when you say, "I am waiting"? You can't bottle waiting. You can't draw a precise boundary around goodness. The dictionary model fails spectacularly the moment you leave the nursery of simple nouns. It forces us to ask the uncomfortable question, what if the problem isn't that we haven't found the real definition yet? What if the problem is that there is no central unifying definition at all? This is the revolutionary pivot, the slow, creeping realization that shifted everything. Meaning isn't some fixed, metaphysical substance residing inside the word, waiting to be extracted. Meaning is activity, its function. It's the way we put the word to work among other people. Imagine you have a hammer. If you ask, what is the meaning of this hammer, you could spend hours describing its atomic composition, its weight, or its perfect geometric form. But those technical descriptions are useless if you don't know how to use it. The full meaning of the hammer is revealed not in its immutable essence, but in its application, driving a nail perhaps, or splitting wood. Words are exactly like that. They are tools in a vast, noisy workshop. Think of the diverse instruments you keep in a drawer. There's a screwdriver, a wrench, a measuring tape, a level. They look wildly different, they feel different in your hand, and they serve utterly disparate purposes. They are only grouped together because they are instruments used to complete a task. To insist that all these tools must share some singular hidden quality, some intrinsic toolness, in order to qualify as tools is absurd. You would never confuse the function of a saw with the function of glue. Yet, we constantly make this mistake with words. We try to force statement, question, exclamation, and prayer into a single, unified bucket of meaning, demanding they all operate by the same laws of reference and truth. They don't. A command isn't a description. A joke isn't a verifiable fact. The rules change depending on the context, depending on the particular game we are playing. And that's the final, beautiful twist, the language game. We don't speak a monolithic language. We participate in countless small, overlapping social practices, each with its own internal logic and flexible rules. When the bricklayer shouts slab, he isn't uttering a grammatically complete sentence meant to mirror reality. He is executing a move in the building a wall game. The word itself is the practical equivalent of reaching out an open hand. When the poet writes, the rules shift again. Clarity gives way to ambiguity, and direct reference takes a back seat to resonance. We learn these games not by studying universal laws, but by imitation and repetition. Just like a child absorbing the customs of a village. The rules are not carved in stone, they are flexible boundaries, fluid conventions that we consent to follow so we can coordinate our actions. If enough of us start using the wrench to tighten screws, then that becomes part of the wrench's meaning. For us, it's contingent, human, and alive. And so, as the day finally draws to a close and I lie here waiting for sleep, the paradox of language dissolves. It's no longer a cage of rigid logic demanding a perfect one-to-one correspondence with the world. It's a riotous, marvelous confusion of tools, instruments crafted for every conceivable human purpose, messy and pragmatic and utterly indispensable. Meaning is found not in the dark depths of philosophy, but right there, in the bright, noisy act of using the word. We stop asking what words are and start asking what words do, and that finally lets the mind rest. The face that changes expression. On the fluidity of meaning and identity, the ceiling fan blades are invisible, merely a whirring suggestion in the absolute dark. I try to count the revolutions, but the number keeps sliding away, like sand through my fingers. Sleep is a language game I have failed to master tonight. The rules are obscure, demanding I cease to use the very instrument, thought, that defines my wakefulness. I close my eyes and focus on a single, uncomplicated word: chair, a simple object, 4 legs, a seat, a back. But hold it still, hold the meaning rigid. It's impossible. My internal image shifts immediately. Is it the wooden kitchen chair, the heavy armchair in the library, or the cheap plastic stool? None of these is the essence of chair. The word itself doesn't hold the meaning. The meaning is held by the context, by the hundreds of different ways we consent to use the sound chair in the public square. If I were to redefine it in this very moment, saying that chair now means the desperate need for water, the sound itself remains the same, but the shared world collapses. What a ludicrous exercise. And yet, this linguistic instability is precisely what defines us, isn't it? That block title that snagged me earlier today, The Face That Changes Expression. It wasn't about deceit or mood swings, it was about the utter lack of a fixed essence. Myself is not a singular sculpture, it is a rapid succession of expressions, flickering across a musculature that itself is always ready to pivot. I am the self that worries about taxes, and the self that suddenly remembers a childhood embarrassment, and the self that constructs elaborate, unnecessary philosophical traps just to avoid the fact that my back hurts. These are not contradictions, they are merely different language games I play under the banner of Elijah. If you freeze any one of those expressions, you haven't captured the face. You've captured a temporary, definable use of the face. The true identity is the movement itself, the fluidity, the refusal to be pinned down by the dictionary of myself. The struggle, though, always returns to the paradox of private language. If meaning only exists in the public arena, through shared rules and observable actions, what am I doing right now? This internal monologue, this relentless churning of concepts, is it philosophy or just glorified noise? If I invent a new sensation of deep, unnameable sorrow right here, one that only makes sense in the context of this stifling darkness and this headache, have I actually created meaning? No. The moment I try to articulate it, to put it into shared words, I am sad, I am grieving, I am anxious. The private, unique essence vanishes. It has to. Language is a toolbox we inherit, not a magic wand we invent. The meaning is not in the feeling itself, but in the agreed-upon public behavior surrounding the feeling. The paradox is that I feel profoundly convinced by this internal logic, even though the logic itself dictates that profound conviction must be based on communal verification. I am, philosophically speaking, a boat floating on a sea of meaninglessness, navigating by rules that only I can see. We are all constantly trying to stabilize an inherently unstable system. We require that the concept of red remain constant enough to stop at the traffic light, even though the internal experience of that wavelength is unprovable, entirely private. We function on the belief that my red is close enough to your red to avoid a crash. It's an act of profound, necessary faith in the shared rules of the game. The exhaustion finally begins to feel less like tension and more like an undertow. The sharpness of the paradoxes dulls slightly. I am ceasing to be the self that argues with dead philosophers and becoming the self that needs silence. I am surrendering the defined self, a suspension of the rules. The last thought, flickering as the conscious world dissolves, is that perhaps the only truly stable word is now. And even now is already gone. The light slips, and the face changes expression one final time. The doubt that comes after everything. When doubting becomes a senseless game, the ceiling is just a gray blur tonight. If I push my eyes slightly, the shadows fragment and dance. It's an easy trick to perform this kind of visual skepticism, the intentional distortion of reality, questioning the basic inputs. But it's cheap. We do this with words, too. We try to be clever, to slip beneath the tectonic plates of meaning, questioning the very bedrock, until we are floating in a void we mistake for intellectual freedom. We chase doubt like a necessary virtue, elevating the question mark above the period. We believe the deepest thinkers are the ones who can ask "what if" one more time than anyone else, pushing the boundary of certainty into a necessary, agonizing fog. But what if the period is the only honest punctuation mark left? It begins simply. How do I know this mattress is real, not solid, not just temporary, but real, the reality beneath the perceived reality? And then the game demands the next move. How do I know the mechanism of knowing is reliable? It's a beautifully crafted machine, this engine of infinite regress, yet it produces nothing but static. The pursuit of universal doubt is an exhaustion, not an enlightenment. Wittgenstein saw the trap. He recognized the hyperskeptic as someone who has tried to move a piece on a chessboard when they have already lifted the entire board out of the game. If I doubt that my name is my name, or that I have two hands, or that the earth existed 5 minutes ago, I am not engaged in a profound critique of existence. I am simply removing the ground from beneath the specific language game we are currently playing. And when the ground is gone, the language game ceases to be meaningful. It dissolves. We must accept certain hinges, not because they are logically proven, or because we have established their truth through empirical evidence, but because they are the infrastructural necessity of thought itself. They are the fixed points around which all real doubt must revolve. Imagine trying to open a door without accepting the concepts of door, key, or the physical reality of opening. The sheer volume of preliminary skepticism paralyzes action and renders communication impossible. If I stand here and announce with great dramatic flair, "I doubt I am awake," what happens? Nothing, because the utility of that statement is zero. It fails the test of meaning, which is use. If my doubt changes nothing, if it offers no contrasting truth, no alternative action, no clarification of meaning, it is not doubt at all. It is merely noise, carefully packaged as philosophy. The senselessness comes when the rules of the game are ignored, yet we insist on calling it play. A genuine doubt, is the market going up or down tomorrow, requires a solid structure of agreed-upon certainties. That markets exist, that time moves forward, that language reliably describes economics. The moment I introduce the foundational doubt, do words have meaning? I have destroyed the context necessary for the specific doubt to register. I have performed an intellectual scorched earth policy. It is the difference between doubting a calculation and doubting arithmetic itself. Doubt the sum, and we can check the ledger. Doubt the very principle of counting, and we have nothing left to check against. We have retreated to a silence that isn't mystical, but merely empty. If someone doubted whether the earth had existed for 100 years, what kind of instruction could we give them? What kind of proof would satisfy them? None. Because the structures of proof and instruction rely on accepting the concept of linear time and historical documentation. That level of doubt is impervious to argument because it stands outside the agreed-upon system of argumentation. This realization, this identification of the limits of sensible questioning, is profoundly restful. The mind can stop spinning its wheels in the mud of hyper-skepticism. The exhaustion isn't from the difficulty of the answers, but from the inherent futility of the questions when they violate the basic architecture of thought. The doubt that comes after everything, the doubt that questions the basic framework of being human and communicating, is not profound. It is a game that refuses to end, and in refusing to end, refuses to mean anything at all. It is the final paradox. Absolute skepticism, when taken to its extreme, collapses into absolute certainty, the certainty that language has failed, and we must finally, perhaps thankfully, just let the world be. It's quiet now, the shadows have settled, the language game of the day is over, and the hinges hold they always held. Where was the I before speaking? Language as the constructor of subjectivity. The city hum has faded into a low, steady drone outside your window. The light has retreated, and now, in this absolute stillness, We must confront the final, vertiginous question, the one that waits at the very bottom of the bottle. You take yourself for granted. It feels like the most solid thing in the universe, the thinker of your thoughts, the feeler of your pain, the center of gravity around which the world spins. You believe that you existed first, and then you learned a language to describe yourself. But Wittgenstein drags us to the edge of a far more terrifying and liberating precipice. Ask yourself this, and let the question truly sink into the dark. Where was this I before you learned to speak? Before you were given the word I? Did it exist, fully formed, waiting in the silence of infancy? Or is it possible that the self you defend so fiercely is not a ghost haunting the machine, but a creation of the machine itself? This is intellectual vertigo. It suggests that your identity is not a private treasure buried deep inside your skull, but a grammatical habit. I is not a person. I is a position in a sentence. It is a necessary linguistic placeholder that allows the grammar of our lives to function. We need a subject for the verb to think, so we invent the thinker. We need a subject for the verb to feel, so we construct the feeler. But if you strip away the language, if you peel back the syntax that divides the world into subject and object, me and you, what remains? Not a lonely, isolated ego trapped in a skull. What remains is just raw existence, a field of sensation without a censor, a witnessing without a judge. Try, right now, in the dark, to define who you are without using a single word that you borrowed from the public world. Try to describe your unique soul without using the shared communal tools of language. You cannot. The moment you try to catch yourself, you are using a net woven by others. You are using words like tired, hopeful, anxious, or human. You are constructed entirely out of shared materials. This sounds like a loss, doesn't it? It sounds like you are a ghost haunting a dictionary. But look closer. This is the ultimate liberation. If your self is constructed by language, then the profound loneliness you sometimes feel, that crushing sense that you are cut off from the rest of the world, trapped in a private bubble, is also an illusion. It is a trick of grammar. You are not an island. You are a text written by 1,000 authors, woven from the same fabric as everything else. The gap between you and the other is a linguistic fabrication. The I is a burden. It is a heavy armor we wear all day to function in the marketplace of names and reputations. It requires constant maintenance, constant defense, constant narration. But here, in the dark, you don't need it. This is why we wait up. This is why we philosophize until our eyes burn. We are not looking for a final answer to write in a book. We are waiting for the language engine to finally run out of fuel. We are waiting for the moment when the narrator in the head, that relentless storyteller who calls himself I, finally grows tired and goes silent. The peace you are seeking is not found by answering the question, who am I? It is found in the silence that follows the realization that the question doesn't need to be asked. So, let the subject dissolve. Let the grammar of the day collapse. You are not the car, you are the road. You are not the speaker, you are the listening. The limits of your language are the limits of your world, yes. But sleep. Sleep is the territory beyond the map. It is the return to the world before words. Let the I vanish. Let the silence rush in to fill the space where your name used to be. The unsaid finally holds dominion. Good night.